Some cars age, and others simply become timeless, because there's something very strange about certain European cars from the 1960s. Even today, more than half a century later, they still look special. They still make people stop and stare. And that doesn't happen because of nostalgia alone. It happens because of design. Cars where every line felt crafted like a work of art, where proportions mattered more than excess, and where some designers practically changed automotive history forever. So in this video, you're going to discover some of the most beautiful European cars of the 1960s. And once you see them, you'll understand exactly why many of them were never truly surpassed. 1961, Jaguar E-Type. This car didn't need time to become a legend, because from the moment it appeared, the world understood it was looking at something special. And honestly, even today it still feels special, because the Jaguar E-Type wasn't simply a beautiful car. It was one of those rare moments where design, proportion, elegance, and aggression aligned almost perfectly. Imagine the context. Early 1960s, many sports cars still carrying heavier or more traditional styling. And then Jaguar arrives with something completely different. Lower, longer, more fluid. Almost as if the car had been shaped by the wind itself. The endless hood, the impossibly clean bodywork, the low stance. Everything communicates speed even while standing still. And that's exactly where the E-Type's magic lives, because it never needs to exaggerate. Everything feels natural. Everything feels right. There's an important detail. When the car was officially unveiled in Geneva in 1961, it caused such an impact that it almost immediately began being considered one of the most beautiful automotive designs ever created. And even Enzo Ferrari eventually described it as the most beautiful car ever made. And honestly, when you look at it today, it's easy to understand why. Under the hood, the 3.8-liter inline-six produced around 265 horsepower. But here, the power almost feels secondary, because the E-Type's true impact comes from the way it looks. The way it blends elegance and sportiness, luxury and aggression, simplicity and presence. Very few cars have ever managed to do that so perfectly. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Series 1. Jaguar E-Type can easily exceed $200,000 depending on the version and originality. 1964. Ferrari 275 GTB. This car looks elegant until you start noticing the details, because the 275 GTB has a very different kind of beauty compared to the Jaguar E-Type. Less delicate, less fluid, and far more tense, more serious, more Italian, and that gives it a completely different personality. Imagine the context. Ferrari entering a new era during the 1960s, refining its grand tours, searching for something more modern, cleaner, visually more aggressive without sacrificing elegance. And the result was this: a low, long, perfectly proportioned car, with a silhouette that seems to move even while parked. The endless hood, the muscular rear section, the tension flowing across the bodywork. Everything communicates motion, but in a much more sophisticated way. And that's exactly what makes the 275 GTB so special, because this car doesn't try to impress through excess, it impresses through balance. There's an important detail. Many examples receive bodywork crafted by Carrozzeria Scaglietti, and that helped give the car its incredibly unique combination of aggression and handcrafted Italian elegance. And honestly, very few Ferraris have aged this beautifully. Under the hood, the 3.3-liter V12 produced around 280 to 300 horsepower, depending on the version. But once again, here, the engine almost feels like part of the scenery, because the real protagonist is the design, the way every line flows into the next, the simplicity of the details, the low and powerful stance. Everything feels carefully calculated. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Ferrari 275 GTB can easily exceed $2 million, or even $3 million, depending on the configuration and history. 1967 Lamborghini Miura. This car didn't look like it came from the 1960s. It looked like it came from the future, and honestly, when it appeared, it changed everything. Because before the Miura, many fast sports cars still followed certain visual rules. front-mounted engines, more traditional proportions, relatively predictable designs. And then Lamborghini did this, a car impossibly low, wide, incredibly exotic, with a V12 mounted behind the seats. And suddenly, the modern supercar had practically been born. Imagine the impact. 1967. Most people had never seen anything like this driving on public roads. The Miura looked impossible. The flowing lines, the absurdly low height, the muscular rear section, the famous eyelashes around the headlights. Everything felt radically different. And yet, it was still beautiful. Because the Miura didn't rely purely on aggression. There was sensuality in the design. The curves feel organic, natural, almost as if the car had been sculpted from a single piece. And that's exactly why it still feels special even today. There's an important detail. The design was created by Marcello Gandini at Bertone, and it completely redefined how a supercar was supposed to look. And honestly, the Miura's influence still exists today. Under the hood, the 3.9-liter V12 produced around 350 horsepower. But here, speed and design almost become the same thing, because this car looked fast even standing still. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Lamborghini Miura can easily exceed $3 million or even $4 million, depending on the version and history. And now I want to know something out of the cars we've seen so far. Which one do you think is the most beautiful? The elegant Jaguar E-Type, the balanced Ferrari 275 GTB, or this Lamborghini Miura that looked like it came from the future? Let me know in the comments. 1963, Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint Speciale. This car feels more like a sculpture than an automobile. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it so special. Because the Giulia Sprint Speciale doesn't follow normal design rules. It doesn't try to look muscular. It doesn't try to communicate aggression, and it doesn't even seem concerned with looking conventional. Everything about it feels different, softer, more fluid, more artistic. Imagine the context. Italy living through one of the most creative moments in automotive history. Designers experimenting with aerodynamics and proportions in completely new ways. And Alfa Romeo allowing something very rare, the creation of a car almost without visual limits. The result was this, an incredibly low coupe with rounded lines, clean surfaces, and a silhouette that seems to glide even while standing still. Nothing here feels rigid. Everything flows. And that gives the car a completely unique personality. There's an important detail. The design was developed by Franco Scaglione, one of the most visionary names of the entire era, obsessed with aerodynamics and organic shapes. And honestly, you can see it in every inch of the car, because the Sprint Special feels closer to a futuristic concept car than to something actually produced in the 1960s. Under the hood, the small 1.6-liter four-cylinder produced around 112 horsepower. But once again, the engine almost doesn't matter here, because this car lives entirely through its design, the way the curves connect, the roofline, the clean and aerodynamic rear section. Everything feels designed to create visual harmony. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. An Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint Speciale can easily exceed $200,000, depending on originality and condition. It isn't the most extreme, but probably it's one of the most artistic cars on this entire list. 1965 Aston Martin DB6. This car doesn't need to demand attention, because its elegance already does all the work. And that's exactly what makes the DB6 so special. Because while many European sports cars of the 1960s chased immediate visual impact, Aston Martin chose a different path, more refined, more mature, more sophisticated. Imagine the context, the mid-1960s, British Grand Tours reaching one of their highest points, and Aston Martin refining the formula that had already made the DB5 legendary. But here, everything feels slightly cleaner, more balanced, more visually solid. The result was this, a long, elegant coupe, incredibly well proportioned, with a presence that doesn't depend on exaggeration to feel special. And that's exactly where the DB6 finds its strength, because this car communicates luxury in a completely different way. Quieter, more confident. The lines are smooth, flowing, perfectly connected. And the slightly extended rear section gives the car a very distinctive silhouette, very British, very sophisticated. There's an important detail. The DB6 helped solidify Aston Martin's image as a brand associated with elegance and exclusivity, especially because of the cinematic and aristocratic aura surrounding these cars during the 1960s. And honestly, very few cars have aged with this much class. Under the hood, the 4-liter inline-6 produced around 282 horsepower in standard form, with the optional Vantage version reaching roughly 325 horsepower. But once again, performance here feels almost secondary to the experience, because the real appeal of the DB6 is in the way it presents itself, the way it occupies space, the way it projects presence without needing aggression. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. An Aston Martin DB6 can easily exceed $500,000, depending on the version and originality. 1968, Maserati Ghibli. This car feels almost too perfect to be real, and honestly, that feeling never disappeared. Because the Maserati Ghibli is one of those rare cars where practically everything works visually. The proportions, the stance, the simplicity of the lines. Everything feels exactly where it should be. Imagine the context. The late 1960s, Italian grand tourers reaching one of their highest peaks, and Maserati wanting to create something elegant, aggressive, luxurious, but without unnecessary excess. And the result was this: an absurdly low car, with an endless hood, a clean and tightly drawn body, and a presence that feels far more modern than it should for 1968. And that's exactly the magic of the Ghibli. Because this car doesn't rely on complicated details. It relies on proportion, the roofline, the wheel placement, the low and aggressive front end. Everything creates an almost absurd sense of visual balance. There's an important detail. The design was developed by Giorgetto Giugiaro while he was still working at Ghia, and many people consider the Ghibli one of the most beautiful works of his entire career. And honestly, it's difficult to argue against that. Because even today, the car still feels elegant in an almost timeless way. Under the hood, the massive 4.7-liter V8 produced around 330 horsepower. But once again, the performance almost feels like it merely complements the design, because the true impact of the Ghibli comes from the way it looks, the way it sits, the way it communicates speed and sophistication at the same time. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A classic Maserati Ghibli can easily exceed between $300,000 and $700,000 depending on the version and originality. And now I want to know something. Out of all the cars we've seen so far, which one do you honestly think is the most beautiful? Let me know in the comments. 1962, Facel Vega Facel II. This car feels like something the world should never have forgotten, and yet almost nobody talks about it today. Because the Facel II is one of the most elegant secrets of the entire 1960s. A French grand tourer, huge, refined, incredibly exclusive, but with a presence capable of standing beside any Ferrari or Aston Martin of the era. And honestly, that makes it even more interesting. Imagine the context. France trying to create a luxury grand tourer capable of rivaling the very best Europe had to offer, but without simply copying the Italian or British formula. And the result was this: a long, sophisticated coupe, visually extremely clean, with a very unique blend of French elegance and American aggression. Because yes, beneath all that sophistication, there was a massive Chrysler V8, and that gave the car a completely different personality. The lines are straight, tense, very refined, but at the same time, the car projects strength. A lot of strength, especially from the front end. And that's exactly what makes the Facel II so special, because it manages to feel elegant and powerful at the same time. Something very difficult to achieve. There's an important detail. The interior of this car was absurdly luxurious for the era, filled with handcrafted details, painted metal panels designed to resemble wood, leather everywhere, and a level of refinement that placed the Facel II among the most exclusive GT cars in Europe. And that helped turn it into an extremely rare car today. In fact, Fewer than 200 units were ever produced, and that explains why almost nobody sees one today. When you look at its value now, that reflects it too. A Facel Vega Facel II can easily exceed $400,000 depending on condition and originality. It isn't the most famous car here, but it may be one of the most elegantly forgotten cars on this entire list. 1966 Porsche 911. This car seems simple until you realize how difficult it was to create something like this. Because the Porsche 911 doesn't shock people in the same way a Miura or a Ferrari from the 1960s does. It doesn't depend on excess. It doesn't try to look futuristic, and it doesn't seek immediate attention. Its beauty works differently, more quietly, more intelligently. Imagine the context. Porsche needing to replace the already successful 356, while understanding that it couldn't lose its visual identity in the process. And that was the risk, because very few brands managed to evolve a classic design without destroying what made it special in the first place. But Porsche succeeded. And perhaps better than anyone else. The result was this: a compact coupe, visually extremely clean, with proportions completely different from almost every other European sports car of the era. The rounded roofline, the raised headlights, the smooth slope of the rear section, everything feels simple, but nothing here is accidental. And that's exactly what makes the 911 so special. Because the longer you look at it, the more sense it makes. There's an important detail. The original design created by Ferdinand Buzzi Porsche eventually became one of the most recognizable automotive identities in history. And honestly, very few cars have remained so faithful to their original shape for so many decades. Because the 911 never needed to completely reinvent itself. It was already born right. Under the hood, the flat-six engine produced around 130 horsepower in the earliest versions. But once again, this car doesn't rely on numbers to create emotion. It relies on balance, on proportion, on identity. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A mid-1960s Porsche 911 can easily exceed $200,000, depending on the version and originality. 1961 Iso Rivolta IR 300. This car feels like the kind of secret only a few people truly know about. And honestly, that makes it even more special, because the Iso Rivolta IR 300 never had the fame of Ferrari, Lamborghini, or Maserati. It wasn't constantly appearing in magazines, it wasn't the star of bedroom posters during the era, but visually, it was incredible. Imagine the context: the early 1960s, Italy experiencing an explosion of creativity in automotive design, and a small company deciding to enter the world of luxury grand tours with something completely different. And the result was this: an elegant coupe, low, very refined, but with a much more discreet and sophisticated personality than most Italian sports cars of the time. And that's exactly where the magic of the IR 300 comes from. Because this car doesn't try to feel dramatic. It tries to feel balanced. The lines are clean. The body has very little excess. And everything communicates a sense of visual maturity that was rare in the early 1960s. There's an important detail. The design was created by a young Giorgetto Giugiaro while he was still working at Bertone. Yes, the same designer who would later create some of the most iconic cars in automotive history. And honestly, you could already see his talent here, because the IR 300 carries a very different kind of elegance, more restrained, more architectural, more timeless. Under the hood, the car used a massive American Chevrolet V8, something that created a fascinating blend of Italian sophistication and American power, and that also helped give it a completely unique personality. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. An Iso Rivolta IR 300 can easily exceed $200,000 depending on condition and originality. 1969 Ferrari Dino 246 GT. This car doesn't feel like a traditional Ferrari, and that's exactly why it became something so special. Because the Dino 246 GT completely breaks away from the classic image most people have of Ferrari during the 1960s. There's no massive V12 sitting in front. It doesn't feel like an intimidating grand tourer. and it doesn't project the exaggerated aggression of many other Ferraris from the era. Everything here feels softer, more human, more emotional. Imagine the context, the late 1960s, Ferrari slowly entering a new era, experimenting with smaller, lighter, more balanced sports cars focused on driving feel and harmony. And the result was this, an incredibly low coupe with soft curves, perfect proportions, and a silhouette that almost feels impossible to improve. And honestly, that's exactly where the magic of the Dino lives, because this car doesn't try to impress you through excess. It wins you over through harmony. The front curves, the flowing roofline, the clean shape of the rear section, everything feels natural. Nothing feels forced, and that's why the Dino still looks incredible today. There's an important detail. The car received the name Dino as a tribute to Alfredo Ferrari, Enzo Ferrari's son. And perhaps because of that, the car always carried a slightly different identity within Ferrari's history. More emotional, more personal, more visually sensitive. Under the hood, the 2.4-liter V6 produced around 195 horsepower. But once again, the engine almost feels secondary to the experience, because the real star is the way the car feels visually. Light, organic, almost alive. When you look at its value today, that reflects it too. A Ferrari Dino 246 GT can easily exceed $1 million depending on condition and originality. And when you look at all these cars together, you begin to understand why so many people consider the 1960s the most beautiful era in automotive history. Because design during this period seemed to have soul. It wasn't only about speed, it wasn't only about luxury, it wasn't only about technology, it was emotion. Now I want to know something. Out of every car you saw in this video, which one do you honestly think is the most beautiful? The one that truly never aged? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see where this obsession with European automotive design really began, you need to watch this video about the most beautiful European cars of the 1950s. Because there you'll find cars that are even rarer, more handcrafted, and in many cases, so elegant they feel more like sculptures on wheels. See you in the next video.